What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. And it is Thursday, September 7th, 2017. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And quick little program note, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 of tomorrow's program. So let's just get right on into it. Obviously, Hurricane Irma is still uppermost on a lot of people's minds here. Unfortunately, you probably remember yesterday and the day before, I said that the predictive track had been shifting eastward. Unfortunately, that stopped, and as of this morning's predicted track, it looks like the center of the storm is going to go right up along the eastern coast of Florida, slightly inland to the south, slightly out to the ocean, more toward the north here, and then it's going to swing inland to Georgia. And I want to mention something for those of you who are going to NOAA's website to get the course and track of the storm. You see these little line of dots in these circles in sort of a cone shape. And what you need to understand, that cone shape represents possible errors in the predictions. Okay, it does not reflect the size of the storm, and especially for all of our listeners who are down there in Florida, you need to understand Irma is a huge, huge storm. It is 400 miles across. That's the distance from Tallahassee to Miami. In other words, it's almost as big as your entire state. So even though the center of the storm is projected to go up along the eastern coastline of Florida, it is going to reach all the way across inland out to the western coast. So please, when the authorities tell you to evacuate, take it seriously. They know what they're talking about here. So getting on into it here, it is a monster storm here, and it's already causing a lot of problems. As you know, Elon Musk's SpaceX won an opportunity to do a launch for the X-37B robotic space shuttle. And up until now, it's been handled by United Launch Alliance, which is SpaceX's rival in privatized space. But Elon Musk convinced them to give him a try. Well, now, unfortunately, that launch vehicle and this robotic shuttle are right in the line of the center of the storm at the Kennedy Space Flight Center. So they're trying to figure out what they're going to do, whether they're going to try and launch early and beat the storm, or whether they're going to try and take it down off the launch pad and get it back into the protection of the VAB, which may not even be able to withstand the force of this hurricane. So it's a very, very tense situation. I remember many years ago, I think this was in the 1980s, and I was on a flight from Los Angeles into Houston, and we were racing the arrival of a hurricane, and that was one of the hardest landings. They did a flaps-up landing. They didn't want to take a chance of a microburst flipping us over, so the pilot just literally slammed that plane down on the threshold markings and hit the brakes, and that was kind of intense on that situation here. Now, Irma is already causing huge amounts of damage throughout the Caribbean. Apparently, they pretty much, the hurricane pretty much trashed the Princess Juliana International Airport on St. Martin. And it's just horrible. We're seeing all these pictures. Apparently, hotels have been smashed, boats tossed. Witnesses are saying literally cars were flying through the air as the hurricane passed on over. Now, the island of Barbuda, not to be confused with Barbados, but Barbuda is literally rubble. 90% of the homes on that island have been destroyed. So it's just been scraped off here, and it's just a horrible, horrible tragedy. Now, Hurricane Irma skirted Puerto Rico, didn't hit it head on, but still the power lines are down. 1 million people are without power. And everybody in Florida is starting to get really, really nervous. They were holding a press conference they're holding another one. The Key West mayor is basically saying we need to get prepared for this thing. The mayor of Miami Beach is saying this is a nuclear hurricane. Get out now. They've ordered mandatory evacuations of 100,000 people. And you need to leave now or you're going to get caught in traffic jams. And given a choice between being in your home, and hopefully you have a hurricane cellar, or being caught in your car out on the roadway when the storm hits. Obviously, being caught in your car when the storm hits, that is a bad thing. A lot of people are still very concerned about Florida's nuclear power plants, which are right in the path of the storm, and the concern that we could have an American Fukushima on our hands here. Now, the operators of these nuclear power plants, the Turkey Point nuclear power plant, and basically Florida Power and Light. Basically, they've got these two nuclear power plants. They're sending most of the staff home, and they're basically tying everything down to prevent flying objects. But as of this point, at Turkey Point or St. Lucie Point, they have not yet made the decision to shut down the plants. And this is a very tricky one because it's not like you go into the nuclear reactor and you flip this big switch to off. It's a very long, involved process to shut down a nuclear reactor in a way that does not cause damage from rapidly shifting temperatures inside those components. So they're still evaluating that, but as of right now, they have not made the decision to shut down those nuclear power plants. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining our network. We're talking about Hurricane Irma, the damage that it's leaving. Now, a little bit of good news, it is starting to weaken. It's down to 175-mile-an-hour sustained winds in the eye, which is still terrible, but it's down from 185 and other estimates that were even higher. So maybe it's going to lose a little of its punch over the next few days here. A lot of people are still looking at the other two hurricanes. Hurricane Jose, it's now reached hurricane force, and Hurricane Katia, which is down in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, as of the last track I checked, Hurricane Jose is going to spin north. It will miss the continental United States, at least the southern states. That's as far as the track goes. Looks like it will give Bermuda a wide berth, which is good for those people as well. Where it goes from there, not sure. Based on past history, probably just continue up toward the northeast and spin out there over the ocean, which is a good place for it. Katia's track is basically impinging on Mexico, but it is causing a huge amount of wave action, large waves throughout that whole Gulf of Mexico as well, and the outer edge of its storm is reaching up into Texas as well. So it is a nasty, nasty event. And again, getting back to St. Martin, hotels have been flattened, houses submerged, shipping containers thrown around like Lego blocks. And this hurricane season has been so bad, FEMA is saying they're going to run out of money by tomorrow because they're sending everything in there trying to get people taken care of. And they're basically the funds they have that were set aside to deal with these natural disasters, they're running out because we are getting so many of them. Now, over in Texas, they're still cleaning up for Hurricane Harvey, and it turns out 1/3 of Texas 41 toxic waste dumping sites are now flooded. And obviously the concern is that these toxins that were stored there are now being spread by the floodwaters, and some of these things cause birth defects and cancer, and it is a huge, huge mess. And again, it almost seems like what we're dealing with here is inadequate planning for worst case scenarios, or a political will to not basically spend the money because we need to go drop bombs on other people around the world here. Yet another artifact of Harvey's, or after effect of Harvey's floodwaters, is the mosquito population in Texas has just exploded. All this pooled water is just an ideal breeding ground. Mosquitoes are just all over the place. It's almost a biblical disaster when you think about it. You know, high winds, flooding, mosquitoes, poison in the ground, poison in the water. Now, over in the corporate media, they're out there pushing that Hurricane Irma is the most powerful Atlantic hurricane ever recorded, and see, it proves there's human-caused global warming is having a tremendous, tremendous effect. And as usual, the corporate media is exaggerating because Hurricane Irma is not the most powerful Atlantic hurricane ever recorded. They pulled it into the Atlantic. because somebody reminded them that Hurricane Patricia, which was over on the western side of Mexico, was actually far more powerful. But basically, Irma is tied, a multi-way tie, for second place in terms of wind strength, but it lost out to Hurricane Allen, which had 190-mile-an-hour winds. And even more interestingly, Irma is down in 12th place in terms of the atmospheric pressure. Now, when they're talking about the pressure, they're talking about a pressure differential, which is why air is moving very rapidly from the high pressure area to the low pressure area. And Irma came in 12th place after Katrina was in 7th place, looks like here. So it's not the most powerful, but they were out there sensationalizing this hurricane. Here's the reality, though. Yes, we got these 3 nasty storms in the Atlantic, but overall, if you look at the chart for the last 140 years, the number of hurricanes hitting the U.S. has actually been in a decline. Yes, we're getting them clumped together right now, but even as carbon dioxide has risen, major landfalling U.S. hurricanes have declined. In fact, they're down 50% over the past 150 years. And so, again, they're out there trying to say this proves human-caused global warming, which is nonsense, because the computer models can't accurately predict the hurricane path a week from now, but the alarmist says, oh, we know what the climate's going to be doing 100 years from now. And again, everybody is trying to exploit Irma for their own political agenda. The other day, we literally saw in the corporate media this idea that Irma was racist because it was aimed right at the black population centers of Florida and so forth and so on. Now we're seeing on Twitter where the anti-Trumpers are actually celebrating the fact that a lot of Donald Trump's own property is in the path of the hurricane and it's going to be wrecked, and huzzah, huzzah, racist Donald Trump is having his just desserts. Well, what about all those black people on all those islands in the Caribbean whose lives have been ruined? Do you celebrate that as well? Or you just do not care as long as you can get your digs in on President Donald Trump? And looking at the United States right now, we've got all these storms on the eastern part of the U.S., and they had flash flooding up in Massachusetts, and we still don't know if Jose might take a turn into the mainland, and we certainly know that Irma is going to go into the southeastern part of the United States, probably as a major tropical storm. But the western part of the United States is still dealing with all these horrific fires. There's literally smoke all over the western side of the United States, and it's just amazing. Now, the fires are out of control because budgets have been cut for fire prevention, budgets have been cut for fire equipment. There was that ridiculous spurning of the offer of the use of the Russian water tankers because of this diplomatic crisis. They finally did get that modified 747-400 into service, and that's doing a lot of really, really good work. But again, the reason these fires on the west part of the United States are out of control is the budgets to maintain the fire break roads were cut. And the shrubbery started to grow over, and now the fires can leap over those fire breaks, and that's one of the reasons they're spinning out of control. The U.S. government has neglected the infrastructure of the United States of America in order to fund their war agenda, and it's coming back to haunt us right now. So you just think about that. The corporate media is still pushing this Russia-Trump collusion, or at least Russia collusion, and maybe we can't link Trump to it. But apparently over at Facebook, Zuckerberg is out there saying that, yes, Facebook conspired with the Russians to tank Hillary's campaign. And the issue is that somebody in Russia appeared to take out $100,000 worth of ads on Facebook. And that's Hillary's new villain. Oh, it was Russia and Facebook did it. Russia and Facebook did it. Now, when you look at the millions and millions of dollars Hillary's campaign spent, $100,000 really isn't a lot. But Zuckerberg is out there saying, yes, I was complicit. I am now repentant. I confess. That's ridiculous. All last year, Zuckerberg was clearly supportive of Hillary. So this is just another attempt to sell you on the idea that Hillary Clinton only lost because of Russia. because like most liberals, she cannot acknowledge responsibility for her own failings and weaknesses. As you know, Senator Menendez is going to trial for corruption. And his lawyer is basically trying every grandstanding trick he can. Apparently got into literally an argument with U.S. District Court Judge William Walls, saying that the trial needs to be postponed because Menendez has to vote on bills before the U.S. Senate. Now, there is actually merit in that argument because there is a law saying that when Congress is in session, nobody is allowed to impede with a senator or a representative that is on their way to do official business. And that law came about because of an earlier scandal where police were arresting representatives to try and swing the vote in the Congress. So there is a legal basis for that. But the judge got into an argument saying we can have the trial at the same time. He can have a recess to go for the votes, but we're not going to delay the trial. And they literally got into an argument. At one point, the judge literally told Menendez's lawyer, Raymond Brown, just shut up for a moment. So it's going to be a contentious trial there. Now, getting on back to more politics and more corruption. Somebody has put out a list of all the Republican politicians who were given money by George Soros in 2016, and it turns out Paul Ryan, the House Speaker, tops the list, followed by Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, Joe Heck, John McCain, Ed Royce, Lindsey Graham, Carlos Crubello, Chuck Grassley, Ron Johnson, Kathy McMorris, Tim Canova, so forth and so on down the list. They're all on the take. They are all on the take here. Meanwhile, getting on over to the IRS scandal. You know the IRS scandal. Oh, we lost the emails, we destroyed the hard drives, we fired the backup company, the dog ate the evidence, foot-dragging, stonewalling, and this air of we're above it all coming from the IRS commissioner doesn't obfuscate the fact that something appeared to be happening with the IRS targeting conservatives and conservative organizations to delay tax-free status, to simply harass them with demands for paperwork. But apparently the federal judge who's looking at this appears to be just as curious about what was going on. And so they're moving forward on that. And I'll tell you, they need to get Lois Lerner on that stand, because she's right at the heart of this attempt to destroy all the evidence and cover up what was going on. Remember what Richard Nixon said, it isn't the crime that does you in, it's that cover-up that follows. If there hadn't been any attempt at a cover-up, making it obvious something was being hidden, the Watergate burglary would have just been reported as city events, and it would have come and gone. Nobody would have paid attention to it. Nobody would have dug down and found out that those were CIA operatives in there. Now, turning over to the war zone, as you know, Deir ez-Zor has now been liberated from the U.S.-backed terrorists, and the corporate media is still trying to spin this as, oh, this is a terrible thing. We're lamenting, oh, the Syrian people have Syria back in their control. It's a terrible thing. Meanwhile, videos coming out of Syria are showing the Syrian people are just happy as all heck over the victory there. They're getting back control of their country, and you're not going to see that on the corporate media. They're still going to try and sell you the idea that the Syrian people are unhappy, the Syrian people are suffering under the evil tyrant Bashar al-Assad, and we have to go in and save those poor people. And again, if you go back and you study that history of all of these U.S. interventions, you will see that in no case at all did life improve for the people of the country that was being invaded, overthrown, regime changed. It always got worse because the country was being looted, stripped mined of its resources, its assets, its wealth. And no democracies resulted. That's another U.S. government excuse. We're bringing democracy to those people. Hasn't happened once. Not once. You get dictators like Pinochet and the Shah of Iran. That's what you get from a U.S. intervention. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. More news coming out of Syria. The leader of al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, has been reported as being killed. Abu Nasibah al-Tunisi has been killed during fighting in Syria's Idlib governorate. And he had previously been the self-proclaimed emir or leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the al-Qaeda group in Syria, which is commonly referred to as the al-Nusra Front. Here's the significant part. He was killed during infighting between the various jihadist groups. So it's all breaking down. These various jihadist groups are fighting amongst each other, and they're starting to kill their own leaders off. And that basically tells you we're very close to the end in terms of Syria right there. Meanwhile, the U.S. is going to send 3,500 more troops to Afghanistan. And again, what happened with the last surge? It failed. What happened with the surge before that? It failed. What happened with the surge before that? It failed. But we know this time, because we looked into our crystal ball, that we can do the same exact thing all over again, and this time we will get a different outcome. The problem with having the White House being run by this military triumvirate, if you will, is they will not hesitate to continue throwing money and your children into Afghanistan, not necessarily to achieve a victory, but to delay having to admit that they've been defeated there as well. Now let's turn down to Yemen, because that is just turning into a black stain, not just on the U.S. government, not just on Saudi Arabia, but on the human race as a whole. And there are some things that you need to know about what's going on in Yemen you will never find from the corporate media. The war in Yemen is not a civil war, which is how it's being portrayed. Civil war, like in the United States, our civil war, Americans fighting Americans for control, or in the case of the Confederacy, just to get the heck out. What we have here is Saudi Arabia coming on in and making war on the Yemen people who did not want to live under the installed puppet ruler that the U.S. put in several years ago. So it is not a civil war. It's not even really a proxy war. As the U.S. becomes more and more directly involved, it's obvious who this is really behind. It's not a Sunni-Shia conflict. It is the people of Yemen who want control of their country back against those who want to usurp their authority, their sovereignty. Now, Saudi Arabia has always coveted political and economic control of Yemen. If you look on a map and you see where they are and they share a common border, Saudi Arabia wants access to that territory and to that coastline. Would give them a lot more leverage in the region. And it's just a horrible, horrible humanitarian nightmare over there. I mean, the blockade is killing more people than the bombs. And then we have the cholera outbreak, which I'm not entirely convinced this is a natural outbreak, because it seems most concentrated in the areas where the conflict is the greatest, the most intense here. And so far, the United Nations and the international community have done nothing to help the people of Yemen, other than with their mouth. They're always out there saying, oh, yes, it's a terrible situation. It's a terrible situation. We here at the United Nations think this is a really, really bad thing. Really? What are you doing about it? Now, Israel seems to be escalating their interest in Syria as well. Apparently, an Israeli plane struck Syrian positions in Hama province, killing 2 servicemen. This is technically an act of war. Israel has no business being in there. And apparently, the Israeli Air Force also bombed the scientific research facility in northeastern Tartus. So they're just going on in and they're just bombing things. That's an act of war. Netanyahu is in a panic. He backed the wrong side in the Syrian conflict, and now he's stuck with it. What is he going to do? Start a war between Israel and Syria and try and get Bashar al-Assad himself? We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about how Israel seems to be wanting to ramp up the war in Syria all by themselves. And Israel is now saying that this research lab that they bombed was part of Syria's chemical weapons capability. Well, there's a small problem with that. Israel can't prove that there were chemical weapons at that facility, because that facility and every other facility in Syria has been inspected. ever since Assad surrendered his chemical weapon arsenal. Israel's just going on in and trying to kick up the Syrian war all by itself. And, of course, you know who they're going to expect to mop up the mess they're going to make, and that's going to be the United States of America. All righty, now, getting on over here, Israel has just announced they're going to have yet another expansion of their largest settlement in East Jerusalem. And it's an arrogant thing for them to say, because if you get past the flowery language, what Israel is saying is, yes, we're going to steal more Palestinian land and put homes on it for our people. And again, these settlements are illegal under international law. The United Nations has passed all these resolutions against Israel for its behavior. The ones in the Security Council are inevitably vetoed by the United States. So Israel just gets to keep on doing what it wants to do. Now, Human Rights Watch has released a report yesterday accusing the Egyptian security services of widespread use of torture of detainees and declaring it a probable crime against humanity. And apparently the security services in Egypt use torture as a systematic practice against suspected opponents of the government. Now, if you think about it, that's like, assume you have a Republican White House and a Republican Congress, and they decide they're going to start torturing Democrats systematically. That's basically the scale of what's going on. And apparently they're using all kinds of methods of torture, waterboarding, electrocution, partial electrocution, so forth and so on. So, yeah, things are really not good over there. Trump is still reviewing plans to send offensive weapons up to Ukraine in another move that could easily start World War III. And I think at this point, it's pretty obvious World War III is coming if it's not already here. I personally think that future history books are going to say World War III was already underway at this point. We just haven't had the real big bang where everybody says, oh yes, all these little conflicts all over the globe, let's just lump them together and call it a world war. I grieve for the human race, I really do. And obviously, along with this arming of Ukraine, it puts further strains on the relationship between the United States and Russia. There's an article that came out of Russia today called Bullhorn's Freefall. It asks, how low can the Russia-U.S. relationship go? At this point, it is anyone's guess. But at this point, Donald Trump's call for better relations is now dead in the water. And yeah, that was one of the things I liked about him when he was campaigning last year. Let's stop all this warmongering. Let's pull back and take care of our country. Let's make America great again. We don't need to run our country by looting and pillaging and plundering everybody else's country. Let's go back to being friends with Russia and China. And that would have been a really good idea, because in the middle of all this nonsense about diplomatic facilities and weapons to Ukraine, the U.S. is still having to buy rocket engines from Russia. And the negotiations, as you can imagine, are a little bit intense. Now, a United Launch Alliance delegation is visiting the rocket engine manufacturer in Russia, trying to buy 5 RD-180 engines. And apparently they have been engaged in these talks for over a year, trying to get a contract signed. And the sad reality is the United States has lost much of that technology that we created during the Apollo missions to the moon. We just let it go. We let other countries take over the manufacturing. The people who really know how to make it work went to those other countries. They were very valuable people to have. We've had a brain drain in this country for most of this millennium. The people who know how to manufacture, the people who know how to make all this stuff work, they've been lured away by a promise of better living conditions in these other countries. And they've gone. They've absolutely gone. We can't make those rocket engines ourselves anymore. There are startup companies trying to do that, but they're going to have to relearn all over again. It's not like a car engine, which is an established solid technology where you can buy the parts and assemble it and expect it to work on the first try. Rocket engines are running right at the edge of their engineering. And that's why you get so many explosions. Now, Saturday is, of course, September 9th, which is the anniversary of North Korea's founding. And Kim Jong-un loves a good symbolic statement on these national holidays, and it is expected that they will launch another intercontinental ballistic missile. And this one really is an intercontinental ballistic missile. They've been screaming ICBMs for these little mid-range rockets. This is a big one. And it's those larger, longer-range rockets that North Korea has had the most trouble with. The earlier tests have all been basically straight up, high into the outer space, and then crash back down. This one is going to be fired at what is called the normal angle, meaning it's simulating an actual flight path to a target, which means it's going to go a very, very long distance. So we'll see what happens on that and how the United States responds to that, and if they try and shoot it down. Now, the U.S. Army is now preparing forces in South Korea for a weapon of mass destruction attack. Apparently, the Army wants their forces deployed in South Korea to train for a potential attack with the use of hazardous materials, which could be radioactive or chemical. They're almost telegraphing there's going to be a false flag to get this thing going. And here's the important part. The United States government understands they will never have the support of the American people unless something happens to convince the American people that the other side has started hostilities. That's been the pattern all along. Let's load up the Lusitania with smuggled weapons for Britain and send it without military escorts into an area where we know the U-boats are. They'll sink it because they know it's full of weapons. And then we'll claim, oh, innocent Lusitania passengers, they're the bad guys, we're the good guys, and we're off to war. That's how these things work. Franklin Roosevelt spent pretty much all of 1941 goading Japan into the attack on Pearl Harbor, and they knew it was coming. Then they pretended it was a surprise attack, those dastardly Japanese. They dropped the blame for Pearl Harbor on Admiral Kimmel and General Short, who did not deserve it, and they were disgraced. They were posthumously returned to rank, which I don't think makes them feel any better about it, given my views about afterlife and so forth. But that's how the U.S. does it. They need something to happen that's going to convince the American people the other side struck first, or the other side did something so horrible that we have to just throw our money and our babies on the designated enemy's bayonets. And it's probably not going to work, because look how much they were screaming about Assad's sarin gas attacks. Didn't get any traction with that. Didn't even really get all that much traction when they were back there screaming that Iraq had nuclear weapons. Every leader in history who wants to start a war has to lie and trick their people into it. The Gleiwitz incident, for example. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, which didn't exist. The Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, which didn't exist. A lot of people are very nervous about what's going to be happening on this Saturday on the 9th. Now, Putin is out there saying that as far as Russia is concerned, it's time to go back to diplomacy and try and talk this thing through and not allow weapons of mass destruction to be used on the Korean Peninsula. And they know it's a possibility. Believe it or not, during the Korean War, General MacArthur actually proposed blowing a hole in the lines with a nuclear weapon. And they had tested that scenario out there in the Nevada desert. Made a lot of those people sick with cancer and leukemia. But from North Korea's point of view, you've got to look at this from North Korea's point of view. They're seeing the United States of America, which has invaded, regime-changed, drone-struck, I've lost count of how many countries over the last 14, 15 years. And then North Korea sees that same government's military carrying out military drills along their borders and along their shores. What are they supposed to think is about to happen? So yeah, there's going to be a rush program to create a deterrent, to send a message to the United States of America: do not invade us, or you will pay a very stiff price for it. Now, unfortunately, with everybody focused on North Korea, people aren't paying attention to what's going on in the South China Sea. China is building up their forces down there. More assets to those man-made islands that they built down there. More naval forces are now down there patrolling to ward off these U.S. warships, which are continuing to violate what is China's territorial waters around those islands. Remember, back at the end of World War II, when the United States government signed the Cairo Convention, it agreed those islands belong to China. And it's another reminder, the United States government does not keep its treaty obligations. So, now, as you know, there have been a number of very embarrassing accidents involving U.S. warships. And it's prompted, finally, a long overdue investigation. And the investigation is showing that there is a serious lack of readiness and safety in the Pacific Fleet. And apparently more than a third of the warfare training certifications for the Navy's Japan-based destroyers and cruisers expired last June. That's a 5-fold increase from 2 years prior. Now, basically what it is, the military, you have to constantly recertify that you are ready to go and do what you're supposed to do. There's constant testing. That's a major part of these drills, is recertification that you are combat ready. The most difficult of all, of course, are those carrier pilots. They have to constantly be recertifying that they can do a carrier landing. They can do a carrier landing at night. If they go too long without doing one in the normal course of business, they have to go back and requalify. But apparently, the Government Accountability Office found 37% of the Navy's destroyers and cruisers in Japan had expired their training certifications. They're not getting enough training out there. And that really, to me, explains what happened with these 2 Aegis ships that wound up ramming and being rammed by these cargo ships. They're under the command of officers who apparently have not been taught that there is a hierarchy of rights of way, and these giant cargo ships and tankers are at the very top. Now, maybe these commanders of these U.S. warships just assume we're at the top here. They'll get out of our way. They can't. Some of these ships can take as much as 5 miles to slow down to a stop. And that's why they're at that top of that hierarchy of rights of way. Now, I'm not calling myself a sailor, but I have spent quite a bit of time in my youth with a deck under my feet and canvas overhead. Actually, it was Dacron. And you got to know the rules. And it's just amazing that it appears our warships are being commanded by people who don't know the rules of international shipping and rights of way. It really is a very alarming situation. Alrighty, let's get into the economy here. Amazingly enough, despite the meltdown in 2008, Wall Street is still playing around with commercial mortgage-backed securities. Not home mortgages, but commercial mortgages. They've moved it up a notch into the retail area. And they're taking these commercial mortgages, they're bundling them together, they're making them into securities. And apparently the retail CMBS loan loss severity is now at 49.4% for the second quarter of this year. And Washington, D.C. has the highest rate of delinquencies. Because when you're talking commercial mortgages, you're talking mostly retail spaces. They're not selling enough product to make enough money to keep up with the payments on their commercial mortgages. That's part of the retail Mageddon. That's the next domino to go after the retail outlets themselves. According to Moody's, these commercial mortgage-backed security loans are backed by retail properties are the worst performing asset class out there. You cannot run an economy on debt forever. And I think the U.S. economy is just about out of time. Now, over in Dublin, Pfizer was planning a major plant expansion for one of their pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities. And earlier this year, they wanted to expand the plant, but apparently because people are starting to turn away from prescription medication, Pfizer has now canceled that plan. Apparently their current manufacturing facility is enough to meet the current demand, and they're abandoning the idea of an expansion. And that may be because more and more people are becoming skeptical of prescription medications and the motives for their being prescribed and sold being other than the health of the patient. So we know that department store sales have gone deep south. The debt-fueled auto boom is about to bust. We were in Sam's Club yesterday. The Christmas stuff is already out. All over the place. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're talking about the economic news as we come up on the top of the hour here. We're seeing, I guess as a warning, coming out of Investment Watch blog that all the indicators are pointing toward something about to let go. The article starts with brace for market turmoil in September, which we're already seeing. It's a very volatile market. And let's see what the Dow ended up at. Dow ended up apparently in the red. Same for the S&P. NASDAQ just barely in the green. The stock market is beginning to stutter despite the best efforts of the plunge protection team. And we know the stocks are overvalued because of all this manipulation. As we mentioned earlier with the commercial mortgage-backed securities, the delinquency rate is growing. It's almost 50%. Professor Steve Keen is saying we're at the peak level of private debt. We can't go any further. We're working as hard as we can just to sustain the debt we're at. And what are they doing in Washington, D.C.? Well, they're just going to go on and raise their debt ceiling and go on borrowing and spending and so forth and so on. They're not really managing the nation for the American people. It's just grab what you can, give it to your cronies, and have another party. We're going to see some glimpses of that in the Menendez trial. This next story, it's a little upsetting because when I was a kid, I was a car buff. What kid isn't, right? I remember one of my most pleasant memories of my youth was helping my mother to restore this 1952 MGTC. And she did the body and the upholstery work, and I did the engine and the drivetrain. And I tell you, the day she drove that around the block was, I think, the happiest I ever saw her. So I'm a car buff. And yes, I watch Top Gear America. I'm actually really liking that show. They've managed to capture a lot of the magic of the original. Great post-production. It's a wonderful post-production team. And so I'm a bit of a car buff, and obviously BMWs are something that people like to drive. And my father had one, and I got to drive it, and I thought it was really cool. But again, as the economy tightens up, everybody starts doing what is called value engineering. We need to make this cheaper. Even though it's a high-end car and people are paying lots of money for it, we need to make it cheaper to stay profitable, to pay all the taxes and regulatory compliance fees and tariffs and the rest of it. And so it was a little upsetting to see this story coming out of New York, where apparently a BMW engine just burst into flames in Cobble Hill. And according to the Fire Department of New York, this is starting to be a common occurrence with BMWs and other European vehicles. Now, Daniel Loza, we'll take this on the other side of station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We've got a couple of callers waiting on the line, but before we get to them, finish up this story from hour number 1 about this BMW spontaneously bursting into flames. The people were just driving down this street. They weren't abusing the car, and all of a sudden it burst into flame. And Daniel Loza, who's a New York Fire Department employee for 14 years, says that it's actually becoming quite common. And the problem is that in order to save money and lower the cost of making the cars, a lot of components near the engine that used to be made of metal are now being made of plastic. And if the engine gets too hot, the plastic can burst into flame. Now, that is a major, major engineering failure. And I'm wondering if maybe the original designers specified a plastic that could withstand the heat, and some money junkie above them said, no, we can make it out of this cheaper plastic, and we'll make more money. But it's very alarming when you see these cars that have had such a sterling reputation over the years. All of a sudden, they're just as junky as American-made cars. Now, before we take our phone calls, quick update on what's going on with the hurricanes. Hurricane Irma track prediction remains the same, skirting along the eastern shore of Florida. Jose, however, their predicted track is now shifting back to the east, and now, unfortunately, it does look like it is headed toward Bermuda. So we're going to be keeping an eye on that as well. Okay, let's take some phone calls. Terry in Oregon, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, what do you say to somebody that says either Trump was a shill in the beginning for the deep state and he was deceptive, or he went up against the deep state and he realized he couldn't win, so he decided to cave in?
I think it's the latter. And again, I go on back to the fact that we know the head of the CIA lied to Donald Trump, claiming the CIA had hard evidence that Assad gassed those people at Idlib. And we know the story didn't make any sense. There was no motive for Assad to do something that's stupid, and he does not, in fact, have any more chemical weapons. So if Trump is surrounded by these advisors he thinks are professionals that he can trust, and they're all lying to him, then they can basically steer him in any direction that they want.
And that's why he replaced a couple advisors already, right?
Well, he needs to replace them all. He needs to get rid of these insiders, these people who spend all of their life inside the Beltway or inside the military-industrial complex. There are talented people out here in this country who have all the skills necessary to do the job that needs to be done in that executive office building. And he needs to start bringing those people in, people who don't have compromising connections with the Clintons or the Bushes or the CIA or NSA or the FBI, because the deep state is trying to protect itself. And so everybody who's got a connection to that deep state, they're going to do what is in their own self-interest, which is to keep Donald Trump deaf, dumb, and blind as to what's really going on.
Exactly. You know, yesterday you mentioned that Egypt is going to join the BRICS.
Yes.
Well, 4 other countries were invited in by China. One was Venezuela, and I think Turkey was, and I forget the other 2. But, you know, that's why they're so panicked. You know, I mean, they want to get this war going with North Korea so they can take over North Korea, and they're on China's border and they're on Russia's border, but neither one of those countries is going to accept it.
No, we're already seeing South Korea is pivoting toward Russia and China. Everybody's abandoning the United States here. That's why they're desperate to trying to get into Venezuela. If Venezuela joins with BRICS, then about at least half of their economic problems are going to go away immediately. Because the United States has been conducting economic warfare against Venezuela going all the way back to the attempted coup d'etat against Hugo Chavez. And so, yeah, right now the U.S. war agenda is in serious, serious trouble. They're about to get kicked out of Syria. They can't make any headway in Afghanistan. The war in Yemen is being seen as a humanitarian disaster authored by the U.S. government. So this is definitely not going according to the plan.
And South Korea wants to start talking to North Korea, and they didn't like that either. So South Korea said, hey, we'll just go to China and Russia.
Yeah, well, again, the more the U.S. imposes sanctions all over the world, the more these countries are going to drop involvement in the U.S.-centric Western financial system, and they're going to go with BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperative or the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank or these other parallel groups that are coming online now. Because these other organizations are not trying to use their being a hub of an international financial transfer system in order as a tool of foreign policy.
Well, the only thing we can hope for is the people in charge of the deep state don't go crazy and start launching nuclear weapons because they know we're going down.
They could. That is a real danger. That's a real danger. All of our futures are in the hands of whichever world leader is the least mentally stable. And frankly, most of them would look really good in a straitjacket at this point.
Exactly. Okay, Mike, well, thanks for the information. Nice talking to you, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, thanks an awful lot here, and we're going to switch over to Steve in California. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, a commercial I saw the other day from Coke. It talked about how their engineers are hard at work trying to do aerodynamics with automobiles to bring us the best fuel economy. And then I just had to laugh at that because I remember going back to the 70s when we had the Honda CRX, and we had a gas mileage, miles per gallon of like 67 miles per gallon. And as technology has advanced in so many areas, that technology has definitely been suppressed because if they had 67 miles a gallon back in the 70s, we should be really, really farther than that down the road. And it's amazing that this technology has been suppressed because of the oil industry, no doubt about it.
Well, that's an easy explanation, and obviously the oil industry, they know they're dealing with impending shortages. They want to be able to sell us less fuel for more money. But the problem with the Honda CRX is it achieved that 60 mile per gallon at the expense of any kind of performance. I mean, if you floored that accelerator pedal, it just took a while to get the car going. And unfortunately, most consumers, their being in that car is an expression of personal empowerment. And they want that car to really take off when they hit the accelerator. And that was the reasoning that led these car companies like Volkswagen to rig the software on those cars so when the car knew it was being tested for emissions, it would run the engine one way, and then when it detected that it was really being driven on the road, it would run the engine another way for higher performance. And it was a cheat. But again, ultimately, they're all going to be selling what they think or the consumer wants to buy. And for most consumers, we don't all need to be driving Lamborghini Aventadores or whatever the heck it is. But we like to know that if we hit that accelerator, we can get out of the way of that truck that just ran the red light coming into the intersection. And so most people want a little bit more power, and that's why there was a bit of a pullback. The other problem, of course, is the encroachment of the ethanol gasoline, because gallon for gallon, it's actually less energetic than straight gasoline. And that was another factor. So you're actually having to buy and burn more gallons of the ethanol blend gasoline to get the same work performance as a single gallon of regular gasoline. That's been another factor as well.
That's it, Mike. Hey, thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, as you know, that DACA issue is just the latest screeching controversy that's coming on out of Washington, D.C. and the media. Now, remember, the whole idea, the DACA, the Delayed Action Child Amnesty Program, first of all, it wasn't focused on children. It was something like 15 to 35-year-olds qualified. Those are young adults. And Trump basically undid an illegality that the Obama administration did, because Obama didn't go through Congress to get this change to the immigration laws. He simply declared it by imperial edict from the Resolute desk in the Oval Office, and you're not supposed to do that. And so Trump is saying, I'm going to rescind this executive order effective in 6 months' time so that Congress has time to do this correctly and properly and in accordance with the Constitution. And so everybody is leaping on board of this. pushing their agenda. The open borders people just want open borders. They want all these illegal immigrants and refugees to come on in and register to vote and vote Democratic. And the media is out there excoriating Donald Trump, saying, think of the children before you end DACA. Well, corporate media, I have a question for you. Where is your concern about the 2 million homeless American children? Children who are U.S. citizens, whose parents are U.S. citizens, who have either died or abandoned them or whatever has happened. We've got 2 million homeless American kids, and nobody in the corporate media seems to think about that. It's all these children coming in from other countries. Should we not be taking care of our homeless people first before we let anybody across that border? And the answer is yes. In a well-run, well-managed nation, we take care of our own people first and foremost. So we're going to go back to the phones here. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. For every dream a dreamer gets is an American that don't get a dream.
It's an American nightmare.
Yep, and they don't care, Mike. Just like they don't care in Europe, they're bringing in all the refugees because it's the same group of people. You know, we talked about this, the globalists, the oligarchy, but they don't care. They don't care. What about the dreams of the Syrian children when they get bombed or they get killed by ISIS snipers? Where's their dream? You know, so they don't give a crap about no kids' dreams. They don't care about old people's dreams. They don't care about women in wheelchairs or anybody's dreams, Mike. They just care about their oligarchy dreams. That's it.
Yeah, they're only concerned about the Syrian kids when they come across our border and are registered to vote Democratic.
Yeah, remember when the CNN dressed the little kid up out of the rubble from the white helmets? You know, the white helmets fraud group. You know how they use them and then they'll toss them back into the rubble after they're done with them. They don't give a crap. You know, they just don't. Americans got to realize there's a percentage of people out there, like the looters, that just don't give a crap about humankind. They just don't.
No, they're in love with their agenda. That's basically what it is.
Hey, Mike, I wanted to switch gears on. They were talking about gas mileage. I was on YouTube. I watched somebody that has like a Lamborghini, and they said they drive it every day, and they said they got to fill it up every day. So that car probably gets about 8 to 10 miles on the gallon, if that. You know, that's pretty bad. You know,
well, no, Lamborghinis are notorious for tiny, tiny fuel tanks in order to keep the weight down.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Well, that's
I wouldn't use
why
that
you
as a
listen to
regular
my radio
driver
show.
Going to work.
Okay, anything else?
Thanks a lot, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful. We're going to let you go here. Thank you for the phone call. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Somebody just sent me this pointer to an article from Consumer Reports. This may explain what's going on with these exploding cars. Because according to Consumer Reports, engines that are burning ethanol blend gasolines run hotter. So what we may be seeing, it may not be BMW's fault or these other European cars. They're designing these cars to run on normal gasoline, and they're brought over here to the United States, and people start putting these ethanol blends in there, and they're running hotter, and that's what's leading to these fires in the engine compartments. It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. So that may be the explanation for that. This whole ethanol thing, it's like global warming. It sounded good, and it made for some good sound bites and, interviews on TV and the rest of it. But it wasn't thought all the way through. First of all, it's not carbon neutral. When you add in the carbon footprint of the processing that takes these vegetables like corn and turns it into ethanol, there's a carbon footprint there. And again, on older vehicles, the ethanol is going to destroy the fuel system. We have to deal with that on our Honda. We've got an 18-year-old Honda. There's only one gas station in our entire town that carries the ethanol-free gasoline for people who've got jet skis or anything else. And that's the only place we'll gas up our car. Because if we put the ethanol blend in there, we're going to have to buy a whole new fuel system, which is probably going to cost more than the entire car is actually worth right now. And it wasn't really thought through because, again, you have to look at this issue that ethanol has far less chemical energy in it than the equivalent amount of gasoline. So you have to buy and burn more of it to get the same amount of work. So you're actually spending more money to keep your vehicle going. And, of course, you're diverting food crops to this ethanol production on a planet where there is already widespread famine. It's a dumb idea. It didn't really help the environment. It was just an opportunity for people to hop on board a fad and make a bunch of money. Getting on back to the situation in Europe, the European Union has now ordered Sweden to end their border controls by mid-November, saying that Sweden doesn't have any more reason for putting them into place. The reasons aren't there anymore. Yeah, they are. There are still no-go areas up in Sweden. There's still an out-of-control rape epidemic and crime epidemic up there. But there's a fight building between Brussels and the member nations of the European Union saying that this out-of-control refugee resettlement program has to come to an end. It is causing all kinds of harm. Yes, it sounds good. We're taking in refugees. They don't know what to do with them. It's a huge strain on their economies. They don't have jobs for these people. They don't have places for these people. And the European Court of Justice, of course, siding with Brussels, has rejected Hungary and Slovakia in their challenge of these imposed refugee resettlement quotas imposed by Brussels. And apparently both Hungary and Slovakia appear intent to continue the battle. This could lead to the breakup of the EU, even more so than the predations of that European Central Bank. Now, over in Germany, of course, Angela Merkel is still fully on board with open borders and New World Order and global government and, today's the EU, tomorrow's the world. And, but one of her opponents is out there basically saying that this has to stop. And it was all triggered. Apparently, there was a German woman in her 50s jogging in the popular Rosenthal Park in central Leipzig, was attacked by a migrant and raped. And apparently it was a rather violent and brutal rape. And so the leader of the Alternative for Germany party, which is doing very well in the polls, Frauke Petry, told Sputnik Germany, this has to stop. We're just opening the borders to people who are coming in who are criminals. And it doesn't make sense. Every nation has a right to control who comes in and out of their borders, just like you have a right to decide who comes in and out of your home. Nobody has a right to just open your door, walk on in and say, I think I will live here. And that's what's going on. That's what Soros is trying to sell you. That, yes, people can just walk on in and decide they're going to live in your home. No, it doesn't work that way. A responsible immigration policy is going to allow into the country those applicants who are going to be a benefit to the country. And it is perfectly reasonable for them to reject applicants with prior criminal records, contagious diseases, or an absence of any saleable skills and talents and abilities. That's how it's supposed to work. That's how it's always worked. It's only in the last few years we've heard this liberal, globalist idea that borders are a thing of the past and everybody should be allowed to go anywhere they want. If that were really true, I'd be on my way to Fort Knox. Well, what am I saying? That building's empty. Do you have a right to just walk into the White House? Technically, it's your property. No, you don't. Everybody has barriers and shields for security and protection, and that should apply to an entire nation. We got to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, as you know, Angela Merkel is out there campaigning. She's running again to be Chancellor of Germany, and she's not getting a very warm response out there. She got pelted with tomatoes the other day. And I keep saying the only way that Merkel stands a chance of being reelected is through massive election fraud And so it is to no surprise that we see in this article coming out of the Register in Great Britain that the German election tabulation software is insecure. And this is according to research by the Chaos Computer Club. This is a group of white hat hackers. They found multiple vulnerabilities and security holes in the German national voting software. And the findings were released by the group just weeks before the vote, which is on September 24th. And so, yeah, that's how Merkel is going to cling on to power. The same way that Hillary thought that she was going to steal the White House. Massive election fraud. So for our listeners in Germany, if you want to change, you need to get out there and just overwhelmingly vote for anybody but Angela Merkel, because otherwise she's going to steal it. She is going to steal it. When you look at how important voting tabulation software is, for it to have so many holes and vulnerabilities, it has to be intentional. A good example would be in this country, the Diebold system. Now, Diebold built its reputation on automated bank teller machines that never lost a penny from one end of the country to another. It had a paper audit trail. They were considered the peak of reliability and accuracy. And yet the same company produced an election system with at least 12 known ways to get in and change the results of an election and leave no trace. And again, a hat tip to blackboxvoting.org and Bev Harris, who have led the fight, exposing the fact that our election system in the United States is a joke. It is set up to facilitate and conceal election fraud. Now, Trump said he was going to look into this, and he darn well better, or he's going to be a single-term president. Absolutely, single-term president. Getting on back to Europe, apparently criminal gangs are acquiring and selling genuine British passports for less than £500 to migrants in Europe. And apparently the price of a stolen passport has dropped dramatically. It was £2,000 a year ago. And apparently more than 20,000 identity documents flooded onto the black market. So the law of supply and demand, too much supply, too little demand, we're not exactly sure which. But yeah, that's why people like to steal passports. And then they'll change the photo, and that will be that here. Now, over in Spain, and in defiance of protests from Madrid, the Catalan Parliament has passed a law to hold an independence referendum on October 1st. And the referendum will simply ask Catalonians whether or not they want the Spanish province to become an independent country in the form of a republic. And those Catalans had better be on the lookout for more election fraud, because we saw it was wide open. They weren't even trying to hide it during the Scottish independence referendum. It's like if the elections could really change anything, they'd be outlawed by our governments. Now, just looking at some of the emails coming on in here. Let's see. All right, getting on back here. We're coming up on our next commercial break here. When we come on back, I want to talk a little bit about political correctness and free speech and how the two are mutually incompatible. And in this desire to promote political correctness, it's really an attack on freedom of expression. And it's also a little insulting if you think about it. And we're going to talk about that when we come back from these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Representative Anthony Brown is announcing plans for a bill that will punish hate speech at universities. And if passed, the bill would require universities and colleges to demonstrate they have programs and initiatives in place that clearly define to students what is acceptable speech and what is not acceptable speech. Meaning they get to decide what's acceptable. And if you really think about it, there's an implied insult in that. Representative Brown and these universities' chancellors are all out there saying, you are all too stupid to decide if what you're hearing makes sense or not. So we must intervene on your behalf and make sure that you only hear the things that we approve of. That's what they're saying. Everybody who comes on out and says free speech must be limited or curtailed is saying you're too stupid. You'll fall for any lie whatsoever, and we need to go back to a world where you're only falling for the lies that we, the government, will tell you. And that's what they're really saying. Now, before this whole rush toward dictatorship really began, a lot of nonsense went out there under the cover of free speech. And most people could figure it out for themselves, whether the person who was talking or writing or presenting made sense or if they were being an idiot. And that's freedom to decide for yourself if what you're being told makes sense or not. And now they want to take that away from you by saying, we're going to say that certain speech is not acceptable. And we know the first thing that's going to be criticism of Israel will be right at the top of that list. Because Israel absolutely hates the First Amendment. All tyrants and dictators do. And look how many people are jumping on board with this thing. Oh, we've got to curtail unacceptable speech. Well, you either have freedom of speech or you have government-approved propaganda. There's no gray area in the middle. That's it. I prefer to live in a nation where we have freedom of speech. I don't want to live in a nation that has permitted speech. I'm a smart man. I can figure out for myself if what somebody is telling me makes sense or not. You're all smart people. You listen to this show, you're smart enough to figure out if what you're being told makes sense or not. We have these people like Representative Brown are standing up and saying, no, you're all such children. You're all so naive and gullible, and you're really such fools. We have to decide for you what you will hear and see and read. And that is an attack on our Bill of Rights. Now, Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, as you know, had a meeting with Julian Assange. He is still trying to break through the palace walls surrounding President Trump to get a meeting with him, saying that he has 100% proof Russia did not hack the DNC emails or Hillary. Trump needs to know that. In fact, that story is on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. Those of you with Twitter accounts, copy it off and post it to the real Donald Trump's Twitter stream. I don't know if Donald Trump even reads his own Twitter stream or not, or if it's filtered before it ever gets to him. But he needs to understand that there is evidence out there Russia had nothing to do with the leaked DNC emails. And Trump needs to know that before we do get into a shooting war with Russia, which I am convinced we will ultimately lose even if it does go nuclear. Although it's hard to say anybody wins a nuclear war. I mean, the U.S. did in World War II because Japan didn't have nuclear weapons to fire back at us. But in a real nuclear exchange where both sides have nuclear weapons, there are going to be no winners. Except the bankers, who are going to start loaning out more money at interest to rebuild what we all had before the insanity. Now, yesterday we had this story from Ohio where a sheriff's deputy shot a local reporter who had set up a camera and tripod on a public sidewalk, and we have a little bit more information about it. Apparently the photographer was just taking pictures of a routine traffic stop. Apparently he had his camera out just taking pictures just for what we in film would call the B-roll, stock photos. And apparently this is a small town where everybody knows everybody, and apparently the photographer who worked for New Carlisle News and the police officer were actually friends. And the officer looked at the camera and tripod, assumed it was a weapon, and shot him. Now, the photographer has survived. He's expected to recover. But again, you have to wonder, what are police officers being taught where this guy drew down on his friend and fired without hesitation? Was he on prescription antidepressants? Was he a graduate of one of these private Israeli security firms that more and more are teaching American police to treat the American people the way the IDF treats the Palestinians? Now, yet another invasion of our privacy has to do in this facial recognition technology where they're out there, where they want cameras just watching our faces and identifying who we are. It's sort of like Minority Report, except they're doing the face instead of the retina. And once again, they've had a test, and once again, it has come up short. Apparently, over in Britain at Notting Hill, they set up a testing ground for a police facial recognition system. And apparently, it drew 35 false matches. And they actually arrested one person that the computer insisted was this known criminal. That turned out to be erroneous. Complete bust. Not a single real criminal was found. 35 false positives, one bogus arrest. I hope the guy sues. And here is another reason why facial recognition system is totally unreliable and should never be allowed as evidence in a court of law. Over in Georgia at the Department of Motor Vehicles, they run on facial recognition. And so this Alicia Kennedy showed up to sign up for a driver's license, and everything went just fine. Then her twin sister, Alessin Kennedy, tried to apply for a driver's license and was refused because, after all, she's already in the system. Probably snafus like that where they want to microchip everybody. Get your little chip. We know who you are now. We got you tagged for sure. Unless somebody digs that tag out, or somebody who wants the money in your ATM account just chops your hand off, takes the tag to raid the ATM machine. And I guarantee when they start chipping everybody, that's going to happen. Criminals will literally dig the chips out of people to access their money at the bank. We're seeing more and more draconian, if you will, behavior by schools in regards to the uniforms. And one of the reasons for the push for uniforms is, again, it suppresses individual identity. You all look the same, you are all the same. Nobody's allowed to be different. Nobody's allowed to have style or anything like that. And a lot of it is getting kind of silly. We're turning into a very repressive society. So apparently, this is over in Great Britain. And apparently at the Winsford Academy in Cheshire, the school turned away girls on the first day of term who were wearing skirts but not tights. And apparently the school dress code is you can wear a skirt, but you also have to wear tights to protect your modesty. The only other option is the girls have to wear black trousers. And some of this is PC-ness. Some of this is trying to respond to the out-of-control refugee sexual assault program. But apparently, and again, this is coming from Great Britain, apparently there's a school that requires you not only to buy a uniform that comes complete with essentials such as ballet shoes and an art smock, but apparently you have to buy it from an approved store. And if you have the required uniform but it's made by the wrong store, you will be sent home. In other words, it's another scam. And I'll give you an example of how that works here in the U.S. As you know, I worked in the film industry for a lot of years. A lot of struggling actors and actresses are trying to find an agent. And one of the things that you have to have is a book of photographs. Hopefully, stuff you've done on stage, photos taken when you've done commercials or whatever. But when you're just starting out, all you have is a portfolio shot by a photographer. And if you start to get an agent, the first thing the agent will say is, you need a new portfolio of photos, and you will go to my friend, the photographer over there, who usually charges an arm and a leg for a new book. And it's kind of sort of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink scam of getting more money out of these young up-and-comers. And it doesn't matter how good your portfolio is. Could have been shot by a master photographer. You have to get your portfolio photos from the approved photographer. It's all about gouging more and more money out of people. Now, apparently over in Washington State, there's this restaurant called the Buzz Inn Steakhouse in Maryville. And according to Cairo 7, there was this situation where there was this woman who was pregnant with twins, was refused service at the restaurant. The waitress said that her crop top violated the no shoes, no shirt policy. Now, her upper torso was covered, but her very, very large, full with twins belly was bare, and the waitress said, "You cannot eat here." I think that is completely ridiculous. This is a pregnant woman. You make allowances. You help them in. You sit them down. You don't just say, you know, your pregnant belly is a shock to our community values and our dress code. Please get out of here. We really have lost our humanity in this country in the quest for political correctness here. We've been talking about the Southern Poverty Law Center, and apparently actor George Clooney has just written them a huge check for a donation to promote their particular brand of hate. We don't know where that money is going to go. But apparently, according to this article from Weekly Standard, the Southern Poverty Law Center invests almost 20% of its endowment fund in offshore equities and other investments. And right now, they have $69 million parked overseas. It doesn't sound like it's a charity to me. Now, the Southern Poverty Law Center's charter is to fund and carry out legal actions against hate and bigotry. If you actually look at their bookkeeping, they actually go to court very, very little. The money is just coming on in, and it goes out to salaries and various other things. It's another scam. And the Southern Poverty Law Center is one of Israel's great friends in the United States. I've even felt their wrath personally at various times throughout the year, or throughout the years, plural here. It's just part of the propaganda machine. Thou shalt not speak ill of Israel, no matter what it does. Well, this is a news website, and this is a news radio show. And when Israel's government does something tacky, it's going to be reported on. And you're not going to discourage me by saying it's just being anti-Semitic, because that's like trying to dismiss criticism of the Nazis by saying you just hate the German people, don't you? And it is ridiculous. Now, getting into the world of computers, everybody's out there, you know, trying to figure out what we're going to do for the hurricane. And apparently there is a digital walkie-talkie application has become the top downloaded app. It's a free download in both Apple's App Store and the Google Play Store, and apparently it is the main communications tool being used by the Cajun Navy Harvey rescuers in Houston. Apparently over 1 million people have downloaded the app and signed up in the last day, most coming from Puerto Rico and Florida. Now, that's all well and good, but unfortunately, you need to read the fine print. There still has to be Wi-Fi or cell phone connectivity in the area where you're using the app. And when you're dealing with the aftermath of a disaster, you can't guarantee that. So, one of the articles that we put on up at our website today, and you might want to take a look at it, especially if you're living in Florida, 10 apps to help you prepare for, respond to, and recover from a natural disaster. And what they're talking about are apps that are internal to your phone, that will do what they're supposed to do without needing to be connected to the cloud. See, it's when you're in a natural disaster like a hurricane and cell communications are down that you realize the main problem with the cloud. Your data is not available to you because it's not in your device. It's off in the cloud somewhere, and it's unreachable until cell service is restored, and who knows how long that's going to take. So most of these apps are things that put all your medical records in one place with an easily recognized logo, the Medic Alert logo, your blood type, medical allergies. So if you are unconscious and you're found and they got your cell phone, they'll be able to read out all of this information and not give you something that you're seriously allergic to. Some of the other apps include first aid, American Red Cross first aid apps. And again, this is a general first aid instruction book that is internal to your device. It does not require cell service. Others are, let's see, there's a mapping application that will work with your GPS. And unlike most GPS systems that, again, have to go to the internet to download the map, you preload this one. It's called maps.me. You preload it with a map of your immediate area. So you'll be able to see where you are without being able to reach Google Maps or Navigon or any of these others. That is actually pretty hip. I'm probably going to get that one myself. Finally, there's Google Trusted Contacts. Set up a network among your friends and family. That one, I think, unfortunately, requires access to the net. Another one that makes sense having, but again, requires access to the cell network is called the Red Panic button, where you can basically create a list of email and text message contacts. You can have a pre-written message, and if something happens, you just hit that red button saying, help, help, I'm going to jail, call a bail bondsman, and everybody will get that message. Lifeline now has an app. Again, that one requires cell connectivity. The Offline Survival Guide, again, internal to your phone. FEMA has an app out now with all kinds of helpful information. And another app called Reunite that helps speed up the process of finding friends and family following a disaster. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I think if you're a prepper, and pretty much everybody ought to be these days, one of the things you might want to consider is getting some radios, because everybody has a cell phone and it's always there and it's always working. And the idea that you could all of a sudden find yourself cut off from cell phone service in the wake of a natural disaster, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And so if you have a large family and there's a possibility that you're going to have to be separated, you can go and you can get these two-way radios. Believe it or not, this one I've got right here in my hand, and I apologize to the non-BAM user people. I actually got this at Radio Shack. I'm sorry, not Radio Shack, Toys R Us. Radio Shack's gone out of business. I got this at Toys R Us, and it's actually a very nice unit. It's waterproof, and it says right on the front of the package, it will reach 30 miles over flat, open ground. Now, the way it works, there is a set of channels that are in this, and half the channels are operating at low power, so you don't need a license to use them, but it doesn't have much range. The high-powered channels require an FCC license, which is not at all difficult to get. It's a General Mobile Radio Service license, and you'll get a set of call letters that you have to mention once per broadcast. And this will give you a means of communicating with somebody that has to be away from you at a time when the cell phones do not work anymore, because that's a reality you're going to be dealing with. I'm sure there's probably a lot of people in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey are out there saying, my cell phone stopped. I don't understand what's going on. But you have to basically be prepared to be off the grid in the wake of a disaster like this. Now, speaking of disaster, getting on back here, apparently the Miami Beach is now being ordered evacuated. Everybody, Miami Beach, Miami itself, they're starting to call for evacuations in certain parts of Georgia. And so I'm glad they're taking it seriously. And they're calling for the evacuations early enough where they're not going to jam up the highways, and people can just basically drive on and find family or friends they can stay with for the few days. And we all have to pull together on this. And that's been one of the really wonderful things to see happen. Yes, there have been the looters and other scum of the earth who are trying to take advantage of this by selling cases of water for $100 plus delivery fee. But overall, what we're seeing in this adversity, Harvey and now Irma, is the American people coming together as a single American people without regard to skin color, gender, orientation, politics, religion, whatever. It's just people helping people, and it totally undermines that agenda being pushed by Antifa and Black Lives Matter, that there's a race hate crisis in America and we've got to do something about it. No, we don't. We don't need to do anything about it. It's a hoax, just like global warming. What we've got is the United States, what we've got are natural disasters, and what we've got ultimately is each other to get through it. Got to take a break for station identification. When we come on back, we got somebody on the phones waiting to talk. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we are going to go to the telephones. Lynn in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I'm here in Tampa. A little bit tense right now.
Yes.
But the Governor Scott has ordered free Wi-Fi throughout the state.
Well, that's a good thing for him to do as long as the infrastructure supporting it remains intact. Now,
absolutely.
Yeah, that's the issue. I mean, there has to be electricity pumping in to all those routers and line amplifiers. So it's great that he's ordering the free Wi-Fi. I think that's a very good thing to do. The question is, will the physical infrastructure survive the onslaught of the storm? And I would say probably along that eastern shore of Florida, the answer is going to be no.
Yeah.
I don't know what force winds those cell towers are designed to withstand. We could see a lot of those things come down.
Right. But at least he's showing good faith.
Yeah, it's a good idea. There's no question about that.
Okay, that's it.
All right, well, thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Sherry in Texas. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike. Hi, Mike. Regarding police brutality, I was going to kind of just file this thought here, but it's coming up again. You're asking the same question, and I'm going to try to get through it, okay? Would it be possible? Now, and let me say first, Lady Claire helped me see something, because she said about a young man with schizophrenia and how he had been unfairly taken advantage of because he had this altered mental state.
Yes.
Due to his impairment. Okay, well, this is kind of the same thing. There was something, I have a way of when I want to see something more clearly, I draw pictures. That's how come I came up with Trump looking like a whale all the time and everything. Okay, I won't go into that anymore, but let me just say this. Would it be possible that psychotropic drugs affect a person's mental state, okay, and they put a brain in an altered state?
Yes.
Now, what I was going to say before is hypnosis by itself doesn't alter a person's better judgment, but from this altered state, would it be possible to control a mind and have it respond to a trigger? Now, trigger's the key word here, because I had drawn a picture of someone can I go into that I drew a picture of someone in a airlines outfit, authority showing someone this gun, and I didn't understand how that fit in, but I'm writing about sleep, go to sleep, I still have it in my notes somewhere, but psychotropic drug, okay, on the right psychotropic drug, when I looked at that gun, I thought, trigger, of course. There has to be a trigger. Now, those airline stewards that were up in the sky, I felt, being experimented with from this altered state. They were told what to respond to, and that's why they became wonky, and we're thinking that the plane's going to crash and everything. Now maybe I'm just.
I'm getting a little lost here. Okay, first of all, let me back on up. The idea of finding the perfect psychotropic drug to render somebody open to suggestion, of course, was the goal of the MK Ultra program. And you're absolutely right. Under hypnosis, people really, contrary to what you've seen in movies, people can't be ordered to cause themselves harm or do something that they're really morally opposed to. What will happen is they'll snap out of the trance. Okay, and that's as far as it goes.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, but MK Ultra, was trying to find a combination of drugs and other stimulants, and they were using a lot of LSD. They had this bondage parlor out in San Francisco where they were just had all these hookers that they'd recruited to work for the CIA, just drugging these men and doing all kinds of weird sex with them to try and see if they could get them into a state of total pliancy, where they would just spill any secret that they had, or they could be implanted with a suggestion like a Manchurian candidate. So far, it's never actually been documented to work. They've thrown a huge amount of money at it. When you talk about people in authority getting brutal, it's probably better to ignore psychotropic drugs and go back and look at the Stanford prison experiment, which showed that when you have a group of people and you divide them into authority figure versus subjugated population, the authority figures tend to evolve toward more brutality, and the subjugated segment tend to evolve toward more meekness and submissiveness. And it seems to be something built into our human nature. In terms of some of these airline stewards behaving the way they are, they're just responding to the pressures they're being put under by management, which is deliberately overbooking airplanes so they will have no empty seats, and then the flight attendants are left to deal with the resulting confusion. And by the way, apparently that's a flight attendant who literally dragged a passenger off the plane by their hair. Nothing's going to happen to them. No charges filed, still has the job, and so forth and so on. So a lot of this is being driven by the economic pressures.
It has nothing to do with some suggestion that they might receive under an altered state, mental state.
Again,
you don't think it has any clout?
No, I don't.
When were these experiments, MK Ultra and all that?
Oh, well, you can run a web search on it. It went on for like a decade, more than that. In fact, it dates back almost to the end. It almost dates back to the end of World War II, because the MK and MK Ultra were the initials of the German mind control program. And so they just said, we're going to take the Nazi MK and we're going to improve it, so we're going to call it MK Ultra, and that's where that came from. And one quick question.
Yeah. Do you think that whole program went underground, kind of like remote viewing, which is what I do?
Well,
do you think the whole thing went underground where, this could be too hot, we might need to use this, we don't want people to know too much about it? They've done it with other things. I was thinking of it today. Things they take underground. Oh, the weather modification. We had that in the late 50s, early 60s.
Sherry. Okay, let's stay back.
It's all related.
Let's stay back on our primary topic here and not go off into la-la land here.
It's not, though.
Okay, well, drop.
No, go on.
Thank you very much. We're going to let you go there. I mean, when we start talking about weather modification and all the rest of that stuff, I know I'm wasting my time and bandwidth here. As far as MK Ultra, basically an incoming director of the CIA found out about the program, especially that bit about the bondage parlor out in San Francisco. They ran that for 9 years, and they got 0 results with it. In fact, the only thing MK Ultra really managed to do was popularize the use of LSD as a recreational drug during the 60s. So the funding was basically pulled. And yes, the CIA will get into things like psychic research and remote viewing. In fact, there's a interesting little story where the U.S. government leaked out a classified, nudge, nudge, wink, wink document about the amazing success the CIA was having with psychic experiments. And this, in turn, tricked the Soviet Union into launching their own program of psychic research and just pouring millions and millions and millions of rubles into something that everybody knew wasn't going to work. And it was just a huge waste of their time and their money. That was the whole point of it. It was a gigantic bluff to send the Soviets down a path that everybody knew was going to be non-productive. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And getting on back to the news here. Getting back to the issue of election fraud, apparently they have done a survey of the election from last November 8th up in New Hampshire, my home state, Granite Stater, and apparently they found over 6,000 individuals had used out-of-state driver's licenses to vote, claiming that they had just moved there. And apparently they're saying that there are 5,000, almost 6,000 out-of-state voters is what tipped New Hampshire to Hillary from Trump. That's how narrow it was. Hillary Clinton won New Hampshire because a bunch of people from out of state came on in and were able to register and vote. It is totally, totally out of control. It is a national disgrace. It is a scandal. And something needs to be done. Somebody wrote on in and reminded me that in an emergency, you do not need a license to use a high-powered radio in an emergency, which is good to know. Basically, it's part of the required learning to get a ham license. I do not have a ham license. I'm thinking about getting one, like I need another hobby at my age. But apparently you can just go ahead and use a high-powered radio if it's a real emergency. And again, please follow the etiquette of the radio. Get your message across as quickly as possible and then clear the channel so other people can use it. Now, what I have discovered here, at least in Hawaii, is that because everybody has cell phones now, the volume of traffic on the bands reserved for handheld walkie-talkie style radios has really, really declined. Most of them are being used for business applications. All right. Now, let's go to the phones again. Yvonne in New York, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, aloha, Mike. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Oh, great. Okay. I noticed yesterday you had a caller on your show, and he was talking about how having borders is akin to slavery. And he was using the word slavery, and I've heard that talking point before from that guy Kokesh, that guy Adam Kokesh, who I thought he was a CIA plant, but whatever. And I noticed that I was listening to somebody on YouTube, and they were critiquing CNN, and they were showing all these crazy videos about what they're claiming in regards to the DACA program. And I noticed that they keep using the word hostage in regards to Trump's policies, and they say that Trump wants to use them as a bargaining chip, and then they move to the word hostage. Trump is taking them hostage, and doesn't slaves and hostages are the opposite of people that cross into the border. This is the opposite. A guy that breaks into your house is the opposite of somebody who you've kidnapped, taken hostage, and treated as a slave.
You're exactly right.
This is what
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
CNN is out there. They don't even report the news anymore. They are just throwing the weighted buzzwords at you to provoke an emotional response against Donald Trump. And this is the reason why CNN's ratings are just falling like crazy, because people go to news channels to get the news, not to just have politically weighted, psychologically weighted words thrown at them. No, Donald Trump is not holding these kids hostage. They're still running around the inside of the United States of America doing whatever it is that they're doing. And all Donald Trump did was undo Barack Obama's illegal executive order altering the immigration laws. And he's giving Congress 6 months to actually legislate a new system in its place. And so this hue and cry over DACA, they've just seized on it as another way to try and demonize Donald Trump. And by the way, it's not working, because Donald Trump's approval ratings are going up.
I think they're going up too. I notice people from social media or on Facebook, people I think are more honest for some reason when they're behind a keyboard, and they seem to not be criticizing him. The leftist friends that I have. But I don't know if it's because I'm a woman or what, but I'm listening to CNN. It's literally, they're scaring me because I keep thinking of Winston, when they just grabbed him and they were torturing him. And I'm like, oh, my God, you're that crazy. Like, it's scary, but it's good to know that his approval ratings are going up.
Well, again, that's the job of the corporate media, to just wave these imaginary hobgoblins at you to scare you into doing what the government or some corporation wants you to do. But it's not working anymore in the age of the internet and the independent media. They've lost the monopoly on what people know. They're no longer firmly in control of what Americans are thinking. And especially after that debacle over Saddam's nuclear weapons, the American people are now very skeptical. And that's a good quality to have in this day and age. A skeptical people are a free people. Those who believe in what they're told, those are the slaves.
Right. That's right. Yep. Yeah, and the Saddam talking point is a very, very good one, because that's always what I use to shut people down. Whenever they try to say, oh, well, I heard blah, 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 I'll always say, oh, from CNN, the ones that said Saddam had WMDs, and that's it. That's how you shut people down.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. I mean, you're out there resorting to authority, and you'll just say, you don't know yourself. You've never met Kim Jong-un. You don't know what he's like. All you have is a description given to you by the same people who told you Assad gassed his own people at Idlib or whatever else. But yeah, the Saddam's nuke, that is a very, very powerful hammer to simply say you're still relying on the people who lied to you about Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons. Okay, do you know the word gullible is not in the dictionary? Is usually how I will end that up.
It's not? I didn't know that. Oh, my God.
All right, well, listen.
You got me. And I tell people to watch All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. And I got to tell you, that is a very, 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 really powerful documentary. I mean, people just are like, whoa, seriously.
Well, Zane,
after they hear it.
Zane Henry did a fabulous job producing that from my soundtrack. But again, the actual article for it, which is in that permanent gray box index at the top, there's a lot more information in there, and I'm constantly adding new information into that article as well, stuff that is not in either of the two versions of the video that Zane Henry did. Anyway, Yvonne, we're going to let you go, and we're going to switch over to Al in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I'm sorry. I want to take you back a little bit to this. These mind-altering drugs, these antidepressants and whatnot. A couple of days ago, there was a write-up on the Canadian propaganda website CBC about finding
antidepressants in the fish in the Niagara River.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that, yes.
Yeah. And I read it, and you know what they didn't say? That if we're drinking that water, we're getting it too. I mean, obviously the fish will have a greater exposure because they're living in this cesspool. But what about the rest of us? And, you know,
that's
don't even mention it.
That's a major problem in our over-medicated societies. You'll take your prescription medication and you'll go to the bathroom, and then that waste will go to the waste treatment plant and it'll recirculate back to the drinking water system. But there's nothing in the waste treatment plant that can deal with pharmaceuticals. And so when you're filling up your glass from the tap, you're getting trace amounts, small amounts of medications, huge numbers of medications, many of which are probably not appropriate for your current medical condition. And yes, antidepressants are a big part of it. 20% of Americans are on antidepressants. And so it would be expected that if, unless you're getting your water from an aquifer or a well, that you're going to have detectable amounts of these antidepressants inside your tap water. And we know that for a certain susceptible segment of society, these medications can trip off aberrant behavior, violence against oneself, violence against others. We did a correlation between the penetration of these drugs into the marketplace along with the rise of incidents of domestic violence. They correlate. I'm looking at the same data now for road rage incidents, and I'm beginning to see a correlation there as well. And it really is a problem. And the pharmaceutical companies are making huge amounts of money selling these pills to the people and not realizing that ultimately every single prescription is being shared by every single American with a city water supply.
And those are just the pharmaceuticals.
Yes.
Now, if you look at farming and all these pesticides and herbicides that go in on these plants, they go onto the ground, they go in down into the groundwater. They end up in aquifers. And you just pointed out, they end up in people's wells. They go into the lakes, brooks. They go into the brooks and streams. They end up down the creeks, into the lakes, into the river, and finally into the ocean. We're killing ourselves. I mean, global warming, if you believe in that nonsense of global warming, it's nothing compared to what we're doing.
You're absolutely
to
right.
ourselves.
Okay, Al,
with all this stuff that we're not even thinking about.
Al,
thank you.
Don't hang up. Don't hang up. We got to take a break.
Okay.
Quick commercials. I want to come back and talk to you a little bit more about this. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Al in Canada, and we're talking with him about what is one of the major problems facing our population in terms of our health, and that is this overprescription prescribing of medications that go through the patient into the sewer system, into the waste treatment plant, water reclamation plant, and comes right back out the faucets in everybody's home. And when you look at medications like prescription antidepressants, where 1/5 of all Americans are on these things, you realize it's not a negligible amount of contamination coming out of that faucet. And the government is not going to address it because pharmaceutical companies are making huge amounts of money. They're very generous political campaign supporters. They don't want anything to disturb their profit making, which is why you get no action whatsoever on vaccine safety issues. Congress actually held hearings on this link between SSRIs and violent behavior and decided at the end there's nothing we can do about it. So if they can't do anything about it and they can't make political hay out of it, it's just simply not important. Let's go talk about how you humans are warming the earth because you can't really tell if we succeed or not when we take your money away and impose new rules on you. So that's how that thing actually works. But we're seeing this incredible recklessness. And again, this is an aspect you find in fascist economic dictatorships where corporations are just allowed to sell products that may not be safe, may actually be harmful. They're allowed to basically pollute the environment. And yes, with the pharmaceuticals, it's an indirect pollution, but it's still happening. And you don't see any of the environmentalists talking about it. But there's a huge problem out there.
Well, even the environmentalists, Mike, They don't talk about all the other toxins that we're pumping into not only the air, but mostly the ground, especially the farming industry. And I'm not pointing a finger at farming. I'm pointing a finger at the people that are making these chemicals. And on top of that, in Canada, especially right around where I live, there's like an effort for the government to get us on this GMO bandwagon when we already know that Monsanto has created, their Frankenstein corn to be so tough that it's not even edible. It's not even fit for human consumption. And the reason why they have to do that is because they're pushing this glyphosate, the Roundup crapola. And, where does that end up? It ends up in the groundwater. It ends up in the streams. It ends up in the creeks. It ends up in the rivers. It ends up in the lakes. It ends up all the way into the ocean.
And it's a probable carcinogen.
You wonder why all of these things are happening. Cancer's through the roof.
Well, somebody
cancer rates have quadrupled.
Somebody did a study and basically said that half of all cancers can be directly traced back to some environmental contaminant. And that it's not always the patient's fault that they've come down with cancer. We live in a cancer-causing environment, which is an artifact of our particular political economic system.
That's an absolute fact. I've been saying this for years and years, that cancer is environmental. It doesn't matter whether it came from the air or from the water or from the food. We're ingesting everything, every dirty little piece of something that we have manufactured. We are now getting it back. We're taking it in.
Of course we are.
And we're killing ourselves.
Now, all these mummies of the pharaohs and the Peruvian mummies and all these people who bob up to the top of the peat bogs in Great Britain, all these ancient bodies they're finding, the Iceman, and they've been studying them. They don't find cancers in these ancient bodies. It's a new scourge, and it just seems to have come about just over the last 100 years or so. And yes, the rates are skyrocketing, and it does seem to be very much linked to some of the side effects of our modern technology. Exposure to petrochemicals can cause cancer. Benzene is a good one. Benzene can lead directly to leukemia. And again, in our country, as long as it's making money, we don't touch it. We don't interfere with it.
Well, that's the whole cycle of life, right?
Yeah. Well, I think
Let's just go out and make some cash, and all the poor suckers, pay for it. But
yeah.
the very simple reality is, how long does this stuff take to break down? Does it break down?
I think for the glyphosate, it's something like 60 years. But I'm not sure about that. I'll take a look. Anyway, Al, we're going to let you go. Take another break for commercials. Got another caller waiting. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I did a little digging during the commercial break here, and it turns out the half-life of glyphosate in soil ranges between just 2 and 197 days. They're saying 47 days is considered a good half-life. After that, half the glyphosate will have decomposed, and apparently soil conditions have a lot to do with it. And I quite by accident stumbled across this article over in San Francisco Gate in their home guides that says basically Roundup is neutralized by water. Basically it says positive ions of iron, magnesium, calciums, and sodiums tie up the glyphosate molecule and render it chemically inactive. And these minerals are available in ordinary tap water. So whatever they put the Roundup in, there's no water in there. So if we're worried about glyphosate getting into the groundwater, once it's in the groundwater, it's going to be inactive, and we're not going to have to worry about it anymore. That's a little bit of good news. My concern is that they're spraying glyphosate on produce to make it last longer in the supermarket. They're spraying it on women's feminine hygiene products. And again, the World Health Organization has declared it a probable carcinogen. And apparently Monsanto is being sued by a class action suit by professional gardeners and farmers who are exposed to the glyphosate. They're spraying the Roundup. Some of it gets on their skin, gets in there, causes all kinds of problems. Okay, let's take a phone call from Fred in Michigan. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, much is on my mind. Angela Merkel of Germany, whom I would describe as the ultimate evil for the German people, the answer to that would have to be a woman by the name of Ursula Haverbeck. Have you ever heard of Ursula Haverbeck?
Yes, I have.
A brilliant German. Okay. So Ursula Haverbeck was set out, to prove that these Holocaust deniers were, wacko nut jobs. And she ended up producing scientifically, mathematically, evidentiary proof that the 6 million Holocaust was actually a whole hoax.
Yes.
Affair. And so the German government said, well, that's sedition pursuant to Holocaust denial. We're going to put you away in prison. And I thought she got a 11-year sentence. She's 88 years young. And it's on YouTube. I discovered this on YouTube. Okay, so I would admonish your German listeners to do whatever they can to initiate a campaign to enlist, nominate Ursula Haverbeck as the ultimate alternative to this New World Order communitarian freakazoid, Angela Merkel. And by the way, on RBM's homepage, Mike, I don't know if you ever checked it out, there's a subject matter called communitarianism.
Yes.
First things first. Lark on communitarianism. What is communitarianism? What is communitarian? Mike, it explains so much, if not everything, being a sort of like an international secret society dictatorship, which I saw a YouTube presentation called Fabian Society, Communitarianism, a New World Order. It's astonishing. It's only about a 6-minute presentation, but it's really, really amazing. Now, Mike, have you ever heard of an amazing science journal called Nexus out of Australia? A guy by the name of Marcus Allen from UK?
No, I have not. Have not.
I had a subscription, Mike, back in the late 90s, and they did an astonishing edition, probably several actually, where they profiled brilliant inventors like Stan Meyer and this guy Al Caggiano, an HVAC specialist out of Boston, who actually patented a really super advanced condenser for air conditioners. And he got to, contemplating, well, the problem with internal combustion efficiency is the fact that...
Fred, you're kind of jumping all over the place from topic to topic. I need you to kind of follow a straight line, because we started out talking about Angela Merkel, and now we're talking about air conditioning.
I'm getting into energy here with internal combustion, because this is monumental, okay? And the guy's name is Al Caggiano. The invention is called Fuel Implosion Vaporization System. What I did was do a voice search for that on YouTube, Fuel Implosion Vaporization System, because I connected with this guy. And here's what he did. And he had Senator John Kerry, who rode in all of his vehicles. He had a 86 Mercedes diesel, full-size Mercedes 86, 162 miles per gallon, with the fuel implosion vaporization system. There are 3 other vehicles, real high mileage. Okay, so Senator Kerry goes to the Senate Energy Committee, and they told Senator Kerry to get lost, go fly a kite. Well, there's a woman now that you can check out. I hope you'll do this at your earliest convenience, Mike, because she has collated historic, documented inventors who applied for patents and were summarily rejected. Some of them died. Some of them went to prison. Her website is called Angel, A-N-G-E-L, angelbabe43.wordpress.com. angelbabe43.wordpress.com. Mike, please, and I admonish everyone in the audience, go there and review it. You could do a year's worth.
Okay, Fred, I have to cut you off here right now, because I just went to that website and all of my security systems lit up saying it's trying to plant malware. So listeners, do not go to that website. Apparently, it's a trap. Fred, I'm going to let you go here. Thank you very much for the phone call. We have heard throughout the years all these claims that there's a magic carburetor that's been suppressed, that there's this and there's that. And maybe, maybe not. But at this day and age, even the oil companies are having to accept the fact that we are starting to run out of oil. Now, they're still in control of all of it. But obviously, if there were a high mileage car that could get 150 miles per gallon, they would be in favor of it. They would simply run up the price on gasoline, so they were still making the same profit, selling less product. It would be in their interests in this world, in this age of dwindling oil supplies, to allow high mileage cars to be developed. We've seen so many of these claims made, and they never really pencil out, so we have to be very, very skeptical of these kind of things here. Now, getting on back to the news here, latest update on the hurricane track for Hurricane Irma. Sadly, the predicted track is now shifting west again, back onto the main part of Florida. I was holding out hope that it was going to shift a little further east and get the eye of the storm out totally over the ocean, but now the latest track has the eye moving up the eastern part of Florida, but definitely on land. So everybody's, again, if you're in Florida, or for that matter, Georgia, if you're in the path of one of these storms, if you haven't started prepping already, you are already too late. The stores are emptying out of everything. Now, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos announced today that the Department of Education is going to review the Obama-era guidance on campus sexual assault, citing concerns that the current policy denies due process to individuals accused. And already she is under attack by all the feminists and the liberals. How can you do that? You're going to trigger a new rape crisis. I remember back in the 1990s when they were pushing the militant feminist agenda on us all, where they were trying to redefine sexual assault down to such things as trying to hold a woman's hand without her permission. And the benefit of the doubt was always given to the women, and a lot of innocent men were sent to jail for crimes they never actually committed. And so, yeah, due process is what protects people from vindictive or simply hallucinatory accusers. And you can't take that away. Now, we all know that certain crimes like rape are already illegal, and you don't need to have additional laws on the campus to deal with that. If you want to stop sexual assaults, one of the first things you need to do is close those borders, because those refugees coming on in are responsible for a huge amount of it over there in Europe. Now, getting on back to Imran Awan and the Debbie Wasserman Schultz scandal, there's been a new development. As you know, investigators and prosecutors have this laptop that supposedly belonged to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and she has been fighting tooth and nail to keep people from examining it. She even went so far as to literally threaten the budget of the D.C. police, that if they examine the laptop, she was going to make sure their budget was slashed. And apparently it has now come out that Imran Awan may have created that laptop and a letter to prosecutors, a letter to the U.S. attorney, and left them to be found by the police as his insurance policy against his winding up in Fort Marcy Park. So that laptop, whatever's on there, it is very, very hot. That's the latest claim coming on out from there. Let's take another phone call. Mark in Georgia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, you know, I think we ought to give Al Gore credit for keeping us safe from Man-Pear Pig.
Yes.
You know, I don't know if you've seen that episode of South Park.
Oh, everybody has.
It is ridiculous.
Everybody has.
Because the thing I think we need to be clear to people is what I have a problem with, and one thing, you've ever seen the TV, actually I think it's on YouTube, is Adam Ruins Everything, and I saw an episode where he went through and did retractions about, well, we were wrong about this, and we made a mistake about that, and I think that's commendable, that he's saying, hey, good, you showed it, you showed the point, we want to encourage critical thinking. And then I saw an episode about global warming, and I'm like, I'd like for you to do when they say the debate is over, well, somehow I missed it. Let's step back and have a real debate where you don't get to choose who is on the other side saying, hold on a minute, you keep propping up this conjecture that this problem is androgenic, that this, it's like, excuse me, this is not a legitimate conclusion. And if your conclusion is legitimate, then it will withstand scrutiny. And if you can't handle an honest debate, don't tell me that I'm the denier. The only thing I deny is that you legitimately know something without due critical thinking and examination. By the way, one gentle word of correction, the word belief means that which is held to be true. I understand to you it has a connotation of people uncritically accepting things, and I understand that. And I am solidly against people accepting things without examination. The Bereans were commended because they examined the scriptures daily to see if what Paul said was true. And one thing I can't stand is sycophants accepting things without testing them out for themselves. So I understand where you're coming from. I agree you have a legitimate concern. But our concern is this global warming thing is just as fraudulent as the so-called war on terror, where we're bombing the crap out of countries that we're doing nothing to threaten or harm us. I'm sure you're in agreement on that.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely on that. The only threat from these other countries is they didn't want to run their economies for the benefit of American corporations. That's why they're being attacked.
And the petrodollar is definitely a recurring trend in countries we've attacked, because Libya left the petrodollar, Syria left the petrodollar, Iran left the petrodollar. Look at this recurring trend of the petrodollar being left, and then we attack them. And we always have this official narrative. And the thing I said to Barry Loudermilk, I don't know if I told you this before, I told him, and I called God as my witness, if all along the Taliban was right when they said, this evidence you gave us does not prove that bin Laden caused 9/11, then the real terrorists are the people that lied to us. And, that's the thing is that I respect your point of view about how people have abused religion, and I'm 100%, 200% with you that people should not abuse their religion as a means of manipulating and controlling others. Legitimate religion is about self-control, about self-examination, not imposing one's beliefs on other people without due examination and gentle persuasion, right?
Absolutely. See, I don't have a problem with people being religious. It's only when they use that religion to implement what I consider to be an evil agenda, like the pedophile sexual abuse, that they're going to get some resistance from me.
Yeah, well, that's the thing I try to get across to people is that Revelation 19:11, it is written of Christ, justly he judges and makes war. Well, if Christ judges righteously and wages war legitimately, what do you expect of the counterfeit? It's going to judge and wage war based on lies. And how dare you, not say that, we have a right to rule Afghanistan. Well, because might makes right is their unstated premise. And it's like calling people insurgents based on the idea that they don't have just as much right to defend their homeland as we have to defend ours, right? Anyway, I best be going. You have a blessed day, sir.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And I'm looking at a press release right now from architects and engineers from 9/11 Truth, and apparently they're having a meeting at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. on September 11th, which is next Monday, the anniversary of 9/11, announcing the Bobby McIlvaine World Trade Center Investigation Act, which is named from one of the people who died in the World Trade Center. And that individual's father and Richard Gage are holding this press conference to call for this legislation, which would impanel a select committee in either chamber of Congress to reinvestigate the destruction of the World Trade Center towers. Will never happen. Everybody knows what was going on 9/11. And they're no more going to have an honest investigation of 9/11 than they will have an honest investigation of CIA drug running throughout the years. But good that they're still out there. Congratulations to Richard Gage. I had the distinct pleasure and honor of meeting him during that 10th anniversary symposium on 9/11. So Monday, we're going to be talking about this a lot. We're going to be talking about this a lot here. Okay, getting on back to computers. A lot of people are starting to really be concerned over just how Google is starting to throw their weight around and use their position to basically bully their way through. And apparently, well, I'm going to tell you when we come back from these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about how Google, and for that matter, all of these social media giants, are starting to just throw their weight around and presume to decide what we should all see, hear, and read, and more than that, to use their influence to try and crush negative reporting on their behavior. And they're getting really a bit of a bully. Now, last month, former Forbes writer Kashmir Hill published an article on Gizmodo discussing an experience she had with Google a few years back, whereby the search engine giant censored an article that was critical of the way in which the company operates. And Hill described this meeting she attended with Google salespeople regarding Google's social media network, Plus. And the salespeople were trying to get Forbes to add a +1 social button to their website, which is similar to the like button on Facebook. And they told Hill that adding the +1 button was important because the presence would play a significant role on how much traffic would be directed to the site. Then apparently when they got wind of this article coming on out, Google put pressure on Forbes, threatening to de-emphasize them in the search results, and Forbes caved in and pulled the story. Now, when you have any entity that has got enough political clout to silence criticism for their behavior, you have to ask, are they a benefit to society or have they become a problem? And so it's not too surprising that we're seeing an article like this one in Government Slaves asking, is it time to break up the social media giants using antitrust laws? And yes, I believe it really is. Now, originally in this country, when newspapers really started to take off, there were laws that limited how much media any one individual could own in order to preserve a diversity of opinion. Now, because corporate media has become the handmaiden of the government propagandists, those laws have been rescinded, which has allowed massive amounts of consolidation to the point where basically most of the newspapers, TV, radio in this country are under the control of just about a dozen people, all of whom have deep financial and political ties to the current establishment. And we are seeing there is no diversity of opinion. every day on this show, every day on my website, you will see stories the corporate media simply will not touch because they don't think you should know. And now we're seeing the social media giants, Google, Facebook, YouTube, so forth, behaving exactly the same way. We need to break up the social media giants. We need to break up the corporate media to get back to a preservation of a diversity of opinion so that everybody can read several different versions of the same news story and decide for themselves what makes sense. Thomas Jefferson once said, the highest duty of every American citizen is to keep themselves fully informed so that they can make good choices. But if all you do is watch TV news, you're not fully informed. You're propagandized. You're not fully informed because these corporate TV news shows are a gigantic lie. They're telling you that you're informed, but they're not informing you. They're telling you only what they think will get you to decide of your own free will what they want you to think. There's the music. It's time to get out of here. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller's program. He's got some great guests lined up for the show here. Please take what you learn on this radio show, what you learn from the website, share them with everybody that you know. We'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Aloha, America.